They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die, but as I collapsed onto the marble floor of Austin's finest restaurant, my body locked in total paralysis. All I saw was my husband's perfect smile. He did not panic. He leaned in, stared into my wide, lifeless eyes, and whispered, "Sleep well, my queen. Your empire is mine now." He thinks I am a defenseless vegetable. He has no idea his nightmare has just begun. Hello to our wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. So if you find today's story thrilling, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and continue creating more stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. My name is Delilah Hawkins. I am 38 years old, and I am buried alive. I am not trapped under 6 feet of dirt, but trapped inside the heavy, suffocating weight of my own flesh. I wake up to the sterile, sharp scent of rubbing alcohol and the rhythmic, mocking beep of a clinical heart monitor. The air in this VIP hospital room in Austin, Texas, is absolutely freezing, settling like a layer of frost on my skin. I try to gasp for air. I try to shift my head. I try to scream until my lungs burst, but absolutely nothing happens. My limbs are cast in invisible concrete. My vocal cords are severed strings. I am locked inside an artificial paralysis, a terrifying condition known as locked-in syndrome. My mind is screaming, pacing back and forth like a frantic caged animal, but the cage is my own unresponsive body. Through my half-severed vision, peering through eyelids that feel like heavy lead curtains, I finally see them. Julian, my impossibly handsome husband, stands right beside my bed. His custom-tailored suit is impeccably pressed, a stark and cruel contrast to the grim reality of this medical prison. Standing right next to him is Clara. Julian always introduced her to our friends with a polite smile, claiming she was his distant cousin, a sweet girl who worked as a dedicated medical assistant. Now, however, she is standing dangerously close to him, her hand resting intimately and possessively on his lower back. "Is she completely under?" Clara whispers, her voice entirely devoid of any familial warmth. Her tone is cold, flat, and chillingly calculating. "The doctor said the neurotoxin has fully bonded to her nervous system," Julian replies, his voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly. "She is nothing more than a breathing corpse now." A dark shadow suddenly falls over my face. Julian leans down closely. I can distinctly smell his expensive cologne, the exact same scent I gifted him on our last anniversary. His fingers, which used to trace my skin with such practiced gentleness, now clamp down ruthlessly on my jaw. He forces my right eyelid open, stretching the skin without a hint of mercy. The bright, blinding blue glare of a mobile retinal scanner pierces straight into my pupil. I cannot blink. I cannot look away or flinch. He is violently harvesting my biometric data right out of my skull. "Got it," he murmurs, pulling the metallic device back. "The retina scan is locked in. The biometric firewall will not be a problem anymore." Clara lets out a sharp, breathless laugh that echoes off the sterile walls. "I cannot believe it actually worked. Look at her, Julian, the great tech genius, reduced to a pathetic vegetable. And as her sole legal medical proxy, I hold the keys to the entire kingdom," Julian says, his voice dripping with absolute triumphant venom. "Every secure server, every hidden offshore account, it is all mine now." They share a lingering, passionate kiss right over my lifeless body, shamelessly celebrating their victory and my supposed demise. They look down at my unblinking eyes and see a completely defeated woman. They think I am drowning in a dark sea of silent panic, but they are entirely, fatally wrong. I am not panicking at all. Behind my frozen, glassy stare, my mind remains razor-sharp, calculating, and exceptionally calm. I am simply counting down the agonizing seconds. 1, 2, 3. The neurotoxin was formulated to paralyze every single nerve ending in the human body, but my husband failed to account for the specialized antidote blockers I had been quietly microdosing for the past few months. Deep down by my side, completely hidden beneath the heavy layers of hospital blankets, a tiny spark of electricity flares to life. The physical paralysis is nearly total, except for one minuscule exception. I focus every ounce of my willpower, every single shred of my suppressed fury, down the pathways of my right arm. Slowly, deliberately, I twitch my right pinky finger. It presses firmly against a microscopic dermal switch embedded just beneath my skin. A silent, heavily encrypted radio signal fires out of the hospital room, crossing the city in mere milliseconds. It reaches my secure underground server, sending a very clear, automated message to my waiting security team. The prey has taken the bait. 8 months ago, the illusion of my perfect life was still entirely intact. We lived in a sprawling, glass-walled mansion nestled deep in the Texas Hill Country. To the outside world, I was just a wealthy, successful tech entrepreneur enjoying the fruits of my labor, but the truth of my existence was far more complex and dangerous. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Nexus Veil Technologies. The general public does not know my company even exists, but federal intelligence agencies and elite global corporations certainly do. We build the most impenetrable digital fortresses on the planet, securing top-secret data storage contracts worth tens of billions of dollars. I do not just manage digital infrastructure. I guard the darkest, most valuable secrets of the modern world. My mind is the master key to a kingdom built on classified information. Julian, on the other hand, was an art curator. His world revolved around Renaissance canvases, gallery lighting, and high society charity galas. He did not know the first thing about advanced cybersecurity, or at least, that is what I had always believed. The first tiny, jagged crack in our flawless marriage appeared on an ordinary Tuesday evening. We were sitting by the marble fireplace, drinking a vintage bottle of wine that cost over $2,000, when the natural rhythm of his questions started to shift. Out of nowhere, he casually asked how my biometric encryption actually functioned. He traced the rim of his crystal glass and innocently brought up my company's death protocol, asking what would mathematically and legally happen to the central servers if I were ever completely incapacitated and unable to run the organization. "I just worry about the immense stress you carry, my love," he had said, his voice laced with an incredibly convincing layer of manufactured concern. "You carry the weight of the entire world on those shoulders. If something terrible ever happened to you, I would want to make absolutely sure your brilliant legacy is protected." At the exact moment those words left his mouth, they sounded like the fierce devotion of a protective husband. But then came the aggressive push for paperwork. A few weeks later, Julian insisted we drastically update our estate planning. He practically cornered me in my home office, forcefully suggesting that I sign entirely new medical proxy documents. He wanted me to completely remove my trusted corporate lawyer from the directive and give him absolute, unchecked authority over my medical care. He argued passionately that a lawyer could never love me or make the right emotional choices for my physical well-being. He demanded to be the sole voice in the room if I ever ended up on a ventilator or in a coma. In my line of work, we do not believe in coincidences. When a highly secure system behaves out of character, it means there is an active breach. My intuition, honed by 2 decades of hunting digital threats, began screaming at me. I started paying much closer attention to the man sleeping beside me. I noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in his daily routines. I caught the faint, bluish glow of a second, hidden smartphone radiating from inside his tailored suit jacket when he thought I was deeply asleep. I noted the sudden, mysterious business trips to Europe that supposedly lasted 48 hours, but yielded absolutely no new art acquisitions for his gallery. A normal wife might have confronted her husband right then and there. A normal wife would have screamed, cried, and demanded to see his hidden phone. But I am not a normal wife. I am a master architect of digital warfare. You do not alert a malicious hacker that you have spotted their malware inside your system. You sit back, you quietly observe, and you trace their dirty signal all the way back to the source. Instead of arguing or shedding a single tear, I quietly reached out to Vance. Vance is a ghost in the real world, a former economic intelligence spy who specializes in high-stakes corporate espionage. I paid him a massive retainer of $250,000 in completely untraceable cryptocurrency to turn his terrifying set of investigative skills onto my own husband. I told Vance to shadow his every single move, track every overseas flight, and dig into the dark, unseen corners of his supposedly glamorous life. While Vance operated in the shadows across the globe, I initiated the most agonizing psychological game of my entire life inside the walls of my own home. I had to maintain the flawless illusion of absolute ignorance. Every single morning, I poured Julian his coffee, looked deep into his lying eyes, and kissed him with all the warmth of a deeply devoted partner. I smiled brightly as he held me, forcing my rigid muscles to relax against his chest, violently suppressing the rising tide of pure disgust that threatened to choke me. But when night fell and Julian was fast asleep, the loving wife vanished. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I would slip out of our bed, lock myself in the master bathroom, and open my heavily encrypted laptop. Sitting alone on the freezing tile floor in the pitch black, I manually hacked into my own home wireless network. I intercepted his data packets, easily bypassed his amateur security protocols, and monitored every single byte of information leaving his devices. I watched his digital footprints, tracing his betrayals as they flowed through the very router I had personally installed. In the world of cybersecurity, a zero-day exploit is a fatal vulnerability that the creator does not know about. Julian thought my blind love for him was his ultimate backdoor into my empire. He was living in my house, hunting my life's work, but he had no idea that the architect of his destruction was sitting right across the dinner table. 3 weeks later, Vance requested an urgent, in-person meeting. We met in the sterile, windowless sub-basement of a commercial building downtown, far away from any digital surveillance networks. He slid a thick manila folder across the cold metal table. That single dossier contained the absolute destruction of my entire reality. I opened the file, and the meticulously constructed illusion of my marriage shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. The man I married was not just a liar. He was a desperate, drowning man. According to Vance's exhaustive financial forensics, Julian was an extreme, high-stakes gambling addict. He had managed to hide it flawlessly, keeping his destructive vice buried deep within encrypted offshore betting syndicates. But his luck had run dry. He currently owed over $45 million to a violently unforgiving underground syndicate based in Eastern Europe. The syndicate had given him a strict deadline. He had exactly 90 days to clear his massive debt, or they would start mailing pieces of him to his wealthy gallery clients. But the revelations inside that folder only grew darker. I flipped the page and stared at a surveillance photograph that made my blood run entirely cold. It was Julian, aggressively pressing a woman against the brick wall of a Parisian alleyway, kissing her with a raw, desperate hunger he had never shown me. The woman was Clara, the same Clara he had warmly introduced to my family at Thanksgiving as his sweet, orphaned, distant cousin. Vance had dug up her real identity. Clara was not related to Julian in any way. She was his longtime mistress, a relationship spanning over 7 years, long before he ever met me. More importantly, she was not a medical assistant. Clara was a highly dangerous, black market hacker known on the dark web for penetrating heavily fortified corporate networks. She was the technical brains behind his desperation. They had targeted me from the very beginning. Julian was the handsome, charming bait, and Clara was the invisible architect. As I read the final pages of the report, their horrifying endgame became mathematically clear. They were never planning to murder me. If I suddenly died, my company's automated security measures, the very death protocol Julian had been asking about, would instantly trigger. A fatal event would permanently freeze every single asset, lock down all the mainframe servers, and immediately transfer control of Nexus Veil Technologies to a blind trust managed by the federal government. My death would leave Julian with absolutely nothing. They needed me alive, but they needed me completely out of the way. Their plan was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated evil. They intended to expose me to a synthetic, incredibly rare neurotoxin sourced from Clara's dark web contacts. The chemical was designed to cause permanent, catastrophic brain damage, simulating a massive stroke that would leave my cognitive functions totally paralyzed while keeping my heart beating. It would be entirely undetectable in standard toxicology reports. Once I was rendered a permanent, defenseless vegetable, Julian would legally step in as my sole medical proxy. With me incapacitated, but technically alive, the death protocol would not activate. Julian would then have unlimited physical access to my living body. He would simply wheel me into my secure facilities, hold open my paralyzed eyes for the retinal scanners, and press my limp fingers against the biometric security pads. He and Clara would unlock the data vaults, steal the highly classified intelligence, and sell it directly to the European syndicate to wipe out his $45 million debt. I was going to be their living, breathing skeleton key. I left the meeting with Vance and drove straight to my corporate headquarters. I bypassed my executive office and walked down into the deepest subterranean level of the building. Stepping inside the primary server room, it is a completely soundproof, climate-controlled vault, humming with the relentless power of thousands of processors. I locked the heavy steel door behind me, sealing myself inside the absolute isolation of the chamber. And then, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the freezing anti-static floor tiles. For the first time since this nightmare began, the cold, analytical armor of the CEO completely fractured. The betrayal violently ripped through my chest. I gasped for air, clutching my stomach as a raw, animalistic sob tore itself from my throat. I wept for the man I thought I loved. I cried for the future I thought we were building, for the children we had discussed having next year, and for the sheer, terrifying cruelty of the monster sleeping in my bed. I let the agony wash over me entirely. I stayed on that floor for 2 full hours, shedding every last tear I possessed for a marriage that had never actually existed. When I finally stood up, the grieving woman was completely gone. As I wiped my face and looked at my reflection in the polished glass of the server racks, only a hollow, freezing emptiness remained. A normal person would have driven straight to the police station with Vance's dossier. A normal person would have hired the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state and destroyed Julian in civil court. But calling the authorities would mean dragging Nexus Veil Technologies into a massive public scandal, exposing my vulnerable contracts to the press. Divorce would only give him a chance to run away and hide. I refused to let him escape. I refused to be a victim in his pathetic, desperate game. They wanted to steal my empire and trap me in a living nightmare. Instead, I decided to play their exact game, but I was going to rewrite the source code. I was going to build an inescapable trap, smile directly in his face, and utterly annihilate them both from the ground up. The architecture of my vengeance began the very next morning. I summoned Vance and Marcus, my chief legal counsel, to a secure off-site location far outside the city limits. I laid out the entirety of Julian and Clara's plot. Marcus turned completely pale, but Vance simply nodded, his eyes gleaming with the cold anticipation of a veteran hunter. We did not call the authorities. We built a trap. In the advanced cybersecurity world, we call it a honeypot. It is a decoy system designed to look incredibly valuable, built solely to lure in hostile attackers so you can lock them inside a digital cage. Over the next 14 days, my most elite engineers and I constructed a flawless digital twin of the Nexus Veil mainframe. We built a shadow server, meticulously populating it with thousands of gigabytes of dummy data, fabricated classified government contracts, and incredibly convincing financial ledgers. To Julian and Clara's scanning software, it would look exactly like the ultimate jackpot. In reality, it was a digital solitary confinement cell. The moment Julian used my biometric data to unlock that specific server, a silent, irreversible alarm would trigger. It would instantly lock him inside the system, trace his exact geographic location, and simultaneously broadcast his financial crimes, his money laundering evidence, and the syndicate's stolen data directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the European mob bosses he desperately owed money to. Simultaneously, Marcus went to work systematically dismantling Julian's actual legal power. We secretly transferred 99% of my liquid wealth, my corporate shares, and the physical deeds to my properties into an ironclad blind trust. We structured it so deeply behind layers of anonymous corporate shells that even a dedicated team of federal auditors would take 10 years to find the bottom. Julian thought he was inheriting an empire, but I was quietly turning his future kingdom into a hollow pile of ash. Securing my digital wealth was only half the battle. I had to secure my physical body against a virtually undetectable neurotoxin. Vance reached out to a former military toxicologist who owed him his life. Twice a week, under the heavy cover of darkness, I visited a subterranean medical clinic on the desolate outskirts of the city. The doctor analyzed the chemical compound Clara was planning to use and synthesized an experimental, highly volatile antidote blocker. Building up the antibodies was pure, agonizing torture. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, the doctor would plunge a thick needle into my spinal column, injecting a concentrated microdose of the counteragent directly into my central nervous system. The pain was utterly blinding. It felt like liquid fire racing through my veins, setting every single nerve ending ablaze for 6 straight hours. I would lie shivering violently on the clinic table, biting down hard on a leather strap to keep from screaming, sweating completely through my clothes as my body violently fought to build a defense against the impending poison. But the physical agony of the spinal injections was nothing compared to the psychological hell of going home. Every single night, I had to walk through the heavy oak doors of my mansion and play the role of the blissful, unsuspecting wife. I had to look deeply into the eyes of a man who was actively planning to permanently destroy my brain. I had to smile when he bought me expensive flowers paid for with the money he was already siphoning from our joint accounts. The absolute worst part was the night. Lying in our king-sized bed, Julian would wrap his strong arms around my waist, pulling my back tightly against his chest. I could feel his steady heartbeat against my spine. I could feel his warm breath on my neck. It took every single ounce of my willpower, every remaining shred of my sanity, not to reach into the bedside drawer, pull out my heavy tactical flashlight, and smash it repeatedly into his perfect, smiling face. Instead, I forced my breathing to slow. I forced my rigid muscles to relax completely into his embrace. I lay awake in the pitch black for hours, letting him hold me, knowing that the hands gently caressing my skin were actively preparing to turn me into a living corpse. I embraced my murderer every single night, feeding his massive ego with soft words and gentle kisses. To spring the trap, I had to give the rat a piece of cheese. I needed to make Julian believe he had miraculously found the perfect, flawless window of opportunity to strike. I casually began leaving my digital calendar open on my tablet in the kitchen. I planted a completely fabricated schedule showing that in exactly 3 weeks, the Nexus Veil primary servers were undergoing a massive 48-hour offline maintenance protocol. I casually complained to him over our morning coffee about how stressful it was going to be, explicitly mentioning that our biometric firewalls would be operating on a localized manual override during that specific weekend. It was a completely manufactured loophole. I handed him the exact tactical advantage he and Clara had been desperately searching for. He took the bait with terrifying speed. I watched his dark eyes light up behind the rim of his ceramic coffee mug. He quickly masked his vile excitement with his signature look of deep, empathetic concern. "You have been working so incredibly hard lately, my love," Julian said, reaching across the marble island to gently stroke my hand. "Since the servers will be under maintenance and you cannot work anyway, why do we not take that evening just for us? We have our 5th wedding anniversary coming up. Let me take you out. A private dinner. Just the 2 of us. to celebrate everything we have built together. I looked directly at the man who wanted to end my life, matching his false affection with a dazzling, entirely hollow smile of my own. "That sounds absolutely wonderful, Julian," I replied, squeezing his hand back. "I cannot think of a better way to celebrate our future." The evening of our 5th anniversary arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of late summer in Texas. The restaurant Julian had chosen was an exclusive, brutally expensive establishment located on the top floor of a towering skyscraper in downtown Austin. The entire eastern wall was constructed of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a sweeping, panoramic view of the city lights glittering like scattered diamonds below. Inside, the atmosphere was a masterclass in curated luxury. Soft, melancholy jazz drifted from a grand piano in the corner. Heavy velvet curtains absorbed the ambient noise, reducing the conversations of the city's elite to a sophisticated, murmuring hum. The lighting was deliberately dim, relying almost entirely on the flickering, golden glow of tall beeswax candles placed at the center of every table. It was the perfect, deeply romantic setting for a murder. I wore a dark, emerald green silk dress that draped heavily over my skin, concealing the faint, yellowish bruises along my spine where the doctor had injected the final, massive dose of the antidote blocker just 24 hours earlier. Sitting across from me, illuminated by the dancing candlelight, Julian looked absolutely breathtaking. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders. His dark hair was immaculately styled, and his eyes held a profound, captivating warmth that could have easily fooled the world. But beneath the surface of this beautiful, romantic dinner, a silent, vicious war was raging. The air between us was incredibly thick, crackling with an unseen, lethal tension. It felt exactly like the agonizing seconds before a bomb detonates. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, my love," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that smooth, intimate register he always used when he wanted to make me feel like the center of the universe. "Thank you," I replied, forcing a soft, appreciative blush to my cheeks. "And you look incredibly handsome. I cannot believe it has already been 5 years." 5 wonderful years, he agreed smoothly, reaching across the starched white linen tablecloth to gently brush his thumb against my knuckles. The physical contact made my skin crawl with pure, concentrated revulsion, but I kept my hand perfectly still. I kept my breathing even and slow, maintaining a resting heart rate of exactly 65 beats per minute. I was heavily trained to suppress panic, but even my iron discipline was being tested tonight. The waiter approached our table, silently presenting a dusty, incredibly rare bottle of vintage red wine that likely cost upwards of $5,000. The sommelier expertly uncorked it, allowing the deep, earthy aroma of fermented grapes and ancient oak to spill into the space between us. Before the waiter could pour the first glass, Julian smoothly raised a hand to stop him. "I will take it from here. Thank you. I want to pour this one myself," Julian instructed, offering the staff member a charming, polite dismissal. The waiter bowed slightly and stepped away, leaving us completely alone in our private booth. This was the moment. Every muscle in my body tensed, preparing for the lethal strike. Julian picked up the heavy crystal decanter. His movements were incredibly fluid, steady, and entirely practiced. He did not shake. He did not hesitate. He poured a generous measure of the dark red liquid into his own glass first. Then, he turned his attention to my crystal goblet. As the wine cascaded downward, the candlelight caught the edge of my glass. Because of my extensive training in forensic observation, I saw exactly what I was looking for. There, clinging desperately to the inner rim of the expensive crystal, was a microscopic, almost completely invisible layer of white, crystalline powder. It was dissolving rapidly into the dark red liquid, disappearing into the vintage wine like a ghost. The neurotoxin, the chemical weapon Clara had purchased from the darkest corners of the internet to completely annihilate my nervous system and turn me into a living, breathing vegetable. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Yes, my bloodstream was heavily saturated with the synthetic antidote blockers. The brilliant toxicologist Vance hired had promised me that the counteragent would aggressively protect my brainstem and central nervous system from permanent, catastrophic damage. The poison would not destroy my cognitive functions, but the doctor had also warned me of a terrifying caveat. The antidote could only block the permanent damage. It could not stop the initial, violent physical reaction. To successfully fake the paralysis, I had to let the neurotoxin crash into my system. I was going to feel every single agonizing second of my body shutting down. Julian set the heavy decanter down and lifted his glass, holding it up toward the flickering candlelight. His dark eyes locked onto mine. In that split second, the mask slipped just a fraction of an inch. Beneath his loving smile, I saw the raw, intoxicating thrill of the predator. I saw the pure, arrogant triumph of a man who believed he had outsmarted a genius. He believed he was about to inherit billions of dollars and leave me trapped inside a rotting cage of my own flesh. "To us, Delilah," Julian murmured, his voice practically vibrating with suppressed, vile excitement. "To the amazing empire you have built, and to our future." I picked up my poisoned glass. The crystal felt as heavy as a lead weight in my trembling fingers. I looked straight into the eyes of the man trying to murder me, offering him a radiant, completely fearless smile. "To our future," I echoed perfectly. I brought the rim of the glass to my lips, tilted my head back, and drank. The wine tasted rich, incredibly complex, and entirely normal. There was absolutely no chemical bitterness, no metallic aftertaste. I swallowed the dark liquid smoothly, placing the empty glass back onto the white tablecloth. For exactly 30 seconds, nothing happened. We continued to smile at each other. Julian asked me a mundane question about the appetizers. I opened my mouth to answer him, but the words suddenly died in the back of my throat. The strike was incredibly fast and unbelievably violent. It started at the base of my skull, a sudden, blinding flash of pure, white-hot agony that severed the connection between my brain and my vocal cords. The elegant dining room violently lurched to the left. The soft, golden candlelight suddenly fractured into 1,000 sharp, blinding needles piercing my retinas. My jaw locked completely shut with a terrifying, audible click. "Delilah, are you all right?" Julian asked. His tone was perfectly measured, dripping with feigned concern. But he did not reach out to help me. He simply leaned back against the plush leather seat and watched me with the cold, detached fascination of a scientist observing a dying insect in a jar. I tried to lift my hand to grab the edge of the table, but my arm refused to obey. The paralysis swept downward like an avalanche of heavy, suffocating concrete. My lungs constricted violently, refusing to draw in any oxygen. The agonizing burning sensation the doctor had warned me about tore through my veins, setting every single nerve ending completely on fire. I was drowning in a sea of invisible flames. My vision blurred heavily, the elegant restaurant dissolving into a chaotic smear of muted colors and spinning shadows. Gravity aggressively and violently yanked me downward. My upper body slumped forward, crashing heavily into the table. The expensive crystal wine glasses shattered instantly, sending a spray of dark red liquid across the pristine white linen like a spray of fresh blood. I felt my chair tip backward. The last thing I registered was the brutal, jarring impact of my head slamming against the cold marble floor. I lay there, completely paralyzed, staring blankly up at the ornate ceiling as the terrifying darkness rushed in to claim me. The ambient noise of the restaurant suddenly dropped into a deadly, horrifying silence. And then, cutting sharply through the air, I heard it. Julian's voice rang out, loud, panicked, and flawlessly acted. "Somebody help. Please, my wife is having a stroke." The silent radio signal sent by my right pinky finger flashes across the city. Back in the freezing hospital room, Julian turns away from my supposedly paralyzed body. He holds the silver biometric scanner in his hand like a winning lottery ticket. Clara quickly places a heavy black laptop on the rolling medical tray beside my bed. Julian plugs the scanner into the computer. Initiating the master override, Clara whispers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I am routing your retinal data into the Nexus Veil mainframe right now. Julian leans over her shoulder, completely consumed by his own greed. They are expecting to see the green glow of unrestricted access, the keys to a multi-billion-dollar kingdom. Instead, the screen freezes, the laptop emits a sharp, horrifying screech. A split second later, the entire display flashes a violent, blood-red color, bathing their pale faces in a sinister crimson light. A single, automated message dominates the center of the screen in bold black letters. Protocol honeypot initiated. Security breach confirmed. Julian steps back, his eyes widening in pure panic. Clara, what is happening? Fix it. Clara violently hammers the escape keys, but the system is completely dead to her commands. I cannot. It is a trap. The server is not just locking us out. It is downloading our hard drives. It is broadcasting our location. She is absolutely right. In that exact fraction of a second, my shadow server executes its final, lethal command. It simultaneously blasts Julian's entire criminal dossier, the undeniable proof of his massive gambling debts, the offshore money laundering trails, and Clara's dark web hacking logs directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But I did not stop there. The system also sends a completely unencrypted message to the Eastern European syndicate he owes $45 million to, providing them with his exact geographic coordinates and the undeniable proof that he tried to steal from them. Before Julian can even reach for the power cord to shut the laptop down, the heavy wooden door of my VIP hospital suite violently explodes inward. A heavily armed tactical team of federal agents swarms into the room, their weapons raised and laser sights painted directly on Julian and Clara's chests. Federal Bureau of Investigation, drop the computer. Put your hands exactly where we can see them. Vance steps through the doorway right behind the agents. He looks at Julian with a cold, terrifying smirk. My lead attorney, Marcus, flanks him, holding a massive stack of legal injunctions. Julian immediately throws his hands into the air, his knees shaking so violently he almost collapses. Clara tries to back away toward the window, but two agents aggressively pin her face first against the sterile white wall, slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists. The sheer terror in the room triggers a massive spike of adrenaline in my system. Combined with the final, overpowering surge of the antidote blocker I had endured months of torture to build up, the chemical chains binding my body suddenly snap. The heavy, suffocating concrete lifts from my muscles. My fingers twitch, then my hand clenches into a tight, powerful fist. I draw in a massive, ragged breath of freezing hospital air. While Julian is begging the federal agents to listen to him, completely oblivious to what is happening behind him, I slowly raise my right arm. I grab the sticky medical electrodes plastered across my chest and violently rip them off. The heart monitor flatlines for a brief second, before I reach over and casually switch the machine off. The sudden silence makes Julian turn his head. When he sees me, all the color drains completely from his handsome face. He looks at me as if a corpse has just crawled out of a grave. His mouth opens, but absolutely no sound comes out. I slowly swing my legs over the edge of the hospital bed. I sit up completely straight, looking down at the pathetic, trembling man who thought he could steal my life. My voice is slightly raspy from the chemical trauma, but it rings out with absolute, lethal authority. You played a very good game, Julian, I say coldly, my eyes cutting through him like broken glass. But you completely forgot who built the board. Delilah, he stammers, choking on his own breath. I can explain. Do not bother, I interrupt, standing up and smoothing out my hospital gown. Marcus has already locked every single asset I own inside an impenetrable blind trust. You are not getting a single dime. You are completely bankrupt. The federal agents are going to arrest you for conspiracy and attempted murder. But the absolute best part is that the syndicate now knows exactly how you tried to screw them over. Even if you somehow survive federal prison, you will spend the rest of your miserable life looking over your shoulder. Julian collapses onto his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the agents drag him out of the room by his arms. Clara follows shortly after, her dark web empire completely reduced to ashes. I watch them disappear down the hallway, feeling absolutely nothing but sweet, intoxicating liberation. 1 year later, the air in Texas is warm and welcoming. Julian and Clara are currently rotting in a maximum security federal penitentiary, facing consecutive life sentences. I am standing on the top floor of the newly expanded Nexus Vale headquarters, wearing a razor-sharp tailored suit, looking out over the city I completely conquered. My company is stronger and more impenetrable than ever before. But my greatest achievement is not the corporate empire. I took a massive portion of my personal wealth and quietly established an underground shadow fund. We provide untraceable financial resources, secure housing, and legal extraction teams for women who are trapped by abusive, financially manipulative partners. I turned my darkest nightmare into a beacon of hope for others. I proved to the world, and to myself, that the absolute best revenge is not just destroying your enemies. The perfect revenge is becoming truly great, entirely free, and absolutely invincible. Thank you so much to all our amazing listeners for tuning in to today's story. We would absolutely love to know where you are listening from. So please let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's thrilling journey and want to help us keep bringing these revenge stories to life, please consider supporting our team with just a $1 donation. You can simply scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity helps pay our hardworking staff so they have the money to support their families and continue creating the content you love. Stay safe, stay strong, and we will see you in the next story.